Okay, so for those of you who are just joining us for the very first time, we're doing a webinar series. On Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, we're getting into Digital Performer 10, different aspects of the program, features, workflows. And then on Mondays, we're going to start Performer Lite. Now, this is a brand new product that's based on Digital Performer. And what we've done is taken some of the coolest features inside DP, and now we're offering it in this lighter version of the program called Performer Lite. Performer Lite was free with MOTU hardware. So if you buy a MOTU audio interface, MIDI interface, you get a license in your account of Performer Lite. Now, for whatever reason, if you've had a MOTU interface for the past couple of years and you don't have this, you can reach out to our customer service, and we're happy to put Performer Lite in your account. And so when you go to motu.com, you can set up your registration, or you can log into your existing account, and you'll have a code that you can then authorize and install. The Performer Lite comes with its own plugins and instruments. It comes with a soundbank. So today what we're going to do, the goal is to talk you through, the initial setup. How does the program work? If you're first, getting into this stuff for the very first time, we'll walk through the various setup. If you're a Digital Performer user, you're going to be used to a lot of the shortcuts and windows, but it's a little bit of a different layout. Performer Lite is designed to be very streamlined and easy to use and fun to use. So what I'm going to do now is mute everybody's microphone, and I'm going to kind of give you a little warm up on what the program does, and then we're going to really kind of break it down and kind of go through each of the edit windows and different features in the program. So what I want to do today is get into how this program is set up, how you guys can dig into it to start using it for creating, songs, scores. It's a very full-featured program, even though it's very well organized and easy to use. And so hopefully by now you've got the program installed. And if you have any questions about it, you can basically go to www.motu.com/m2-start or M4-start. There's a number of videos that will walk you through downloading it, registering it in your account, that kind of thing, the initial setup of it. So let us know. Reach out to customer service if you have any questions about registering your product or about getting a license of Performer Lite. And so again, it's free and it comes with your hardware. We're going to close this project, and I'm not going to save it. So the first thing that happens when you launch Performer Lite at the beginning of the day is it's going to open up what's called the welcome window. And also, if you're running a Mac computer or a PC, you can set up a shortcut. So as soon as it shows up on the dock, you can just right-click on the application, and you can just have it keep it in the dock, so there you'll have access to it. When the welcome window opens up for the first time, you'll see you have access to things like templates, where they're empty projects that are empty from scratch. You can add whatever you want, MIDI tracks, audio tracks, virtual instruments. And then we give you a number of nice starting templates. Songwriter, where it gives you a handful of different types of tracks, pianos, drums, some audio tracks for recording acoustic guitars or things like that. Of course, vocal templates with guitar tones, keyboard tones, lo-fi with drum machines and things like that built into it, or even ensembles, whether a basics orchestral template if you're going to do film scoring. Because when you install Performer Lite, we've also installed a version of Workstation from UVI. So UVI is a company that makes a sampling program and a playback engine for sound libraries. So we've developed a 1.6 gigabyte sample library or sound library that is included and installed with Performer Lite. So now you've got sounds already built in. We provide synthesizers and audio plugins, but we also give you a sound bank of sounds that comes with it. And so as you choose these different templates, you'll get access to those different sounds. So it's very easy to get through the welcome window. And on the right here, it'll show you recent projects. So there's the project I just opened. I could also go to open to find other projects on my hard drive. And on the far right, you'll see a little arrow here, which will open up MOTU News. Basically, this takes us to our website to get to news stories, updates, to learn more about our products. You'll see this on the right side of the welcome window. So we can close that. So templates, recent projects, and also the next thing I want to do is bring up the Performer Lite demo. So this is also installed with the program. So we can just come down here and click on it. Start loading. Just a second here to open. So the first thing you're going to see in this project is this main body. This is the main edit window. On the right, we're going to get through each of these parts of the program so you can see what we're doing. But first and foremost, let's concentrate on the main body of the window. So you'll notice that we've got different kinds of tracks in here. Whenever you see these kind of blocks, you're going to know that that's a MIDI track. Okay, a MIDI track is when you're playing in notes from your keyboard controller. Now, many of you who are now getting into this, you may not have a MIDI interface, but if you look online at different keyboard controllers, you might want a pad controller or some kind of a keyboard that connects to the computer, usually through USB. Sometimes they're MIDI, and you might need a MIDI interface, but if you have an M-series audio interface, we also give you a MIDI in and out port. So ask us if you have any questions about setting up an external MIDI device. But generally, if you go online and you buy a MIDI keyboard, it's USB. So you'll install the driver, or in some cases, it'll just be plug and play, and you'll be able to play in and trigger the instruments inside of Performer Lite. And then, of course, you can see in here audio tracks. And we're going to get into how we can edit the MIDI tracks, edit the audio tracks, and this is the list of the tracks in our project. And up above, this is where we get to the various edit windows. So this is called the sequence editor, the main edit window. Right to the right of it, the next thing over, you'll see the notes. That's our notation window. So this program does come with the ability to do MIDI notation. So if you wanted to create a score or some kind of a musical chart with melodies for instruments, you're able to do so inside the notation window. So that's the notation editor. Next is the mixing environment, where you can see all the tracks in the projects are listed in here. And of course, we have a fader to change the volume of everything in the project. Each track can have its own different level, different balance, and we have a panning, so you can move your sound left or right in the stereo image, so you can pan. And we have automation modes, which we'll get into at some point, where you're able to automate things automatically. When you want to change levels halfway through the song, or if you want to, you can automate every parameter of this program. And so that's the automation modes. And also we're going to talk about the instruments that come with the program. For instance, we provide synthesizers that come with it, reverbs, a whole bunch of great effects are built into Performer Lite. So not only as you start recording your own instruments or start using our instruments, you'll have all sorts of EQs and filters and reverbs and things to add to your work so that you can finally create your mix and have all the effects just as you want them in the project. So this is the mixing environment, and we also have, you can see all the tracks. I have a master track, which is my overall volume. Cool, so that's the mixer view. The next view, you'll notice that when I started my demo, I was using what's called the clips window. And this is an interactive environment where you can create MIDI loops or audio loops. And so, for instance, you'll notice in here we have each of the tracks that are in the project, we have a column where we can actually put different types of loops, MIDI files, audio files. Now MIDI files go with MIDI tracks and audio files go with audio tracks, but you'll notice if my audio track, if I double click on this, it brings up the audio file, and you can see it's set to an 8-bar loop, and I'm able to change the loop point of the file. I can come in here and edit too. I can do all sorts of edits. If I wanted to cut this, we're able to get in. And so once we create our audio or MIDI loops, we can simply play enable them. They'll drop down and they'll start playing automatically, and they'll just loop. So you can start creating interesting loop, different songs and productions with different types of loops playing at the same time. And you'll also be able to organize those in such a way that you'll be able to play them as a scene. So as they click and drag down, you'll be playing different clips at different times. And so how often they'll update is based on this cue grid. So for instance, if I play enable something like this, and I'm going to drop something else in, 3. So that's in the key. So now that's playing, I can easily clear that out. And so it's a cool environment where you're able to not just have sounds or tracks that you add into the edit window and play in real time, but you're going to have different loops that you can key in, drop in, delete, remove, and it's very interactive. You could use it in a live situation. Of course, you could use it in the studio. So there's a lot of great things built into Performer Lite that it's not just recording audio and songs. You could also use it for performance. So you might be triggering loops in a situation. Let's say you've got a laptop and you want it to be able to drop in loops and play live instruments along with those. There's a lot you can do with this program. And today is just kind of a getting started to get kind of your head around what this program is capable of. So this is the clips environment. And we can see it's got a mixing also environment at the bottom where you can change the level of each of the tracks. Cool. So that's the layout, the main 4 edit windows, the sequence editor, the notation editor, the mixing environment, and the clips window. We're going to do a lot of our work, probably the most, in the sequence window. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is something straightforward for everybody, which of course is just this transport. So we're able to rewind and fast forward, and of course we can stop, play, and record. So those are easy. You'll learn those right off the bat, so you're able to just hit play. And of course the space bar on the Mac or PC will also start and stop the playback for you. And not only can you rewind, in these large chunks, but you can also, on the keyboard, your Mac or PC keyboard, if you hit the 1 key, if you have a numeric keypad, will always take you back to bar 1. So the 1 key takes you back home, or bar 1. And so you'll learn tricks as you go. If you hit period to 0, you can go to bar 20, and which brings up another point. So this is where you have your transport, rewinding, fast forwarding, stop, play, record, and also we have our counter. So right now this is set to bars, beats, and ticks. So we're thinking in terms of musical values. Bar 20, maybe we want to go back to bar 1. But maybe you're just doing a song and you want to play in the guitar part and you just want to look at the time. Maybe it's better to look in minutes and seconds, no problem. Or you could switch to things like frames if you're getting into film scoring and you need to reference time code. So it's up to you. You can always switch this. And to the right shows us our tempo, 142 beats per minute. Of course, we can change the tempo. We can speed it up, slow it down, set it wherever you want it to be when you create your project. And of course, we can set the time signature or the meter. So we're just in 4/4 time. You can switch that to whatever meter you want, 3/4, 5/4, and so on and so forth. To the right of this are some other shortcuts that I want to show you. So first thing I want to talk about is the shortcut called Overdub. So Overdub is when you're recording MIDI. If I go to a MIDI track and I play, it's kind of a nice wind synthesizer effect. So if I hit record in DP, I can play in that part. But if I turn on Overdub, I can add a layer on top of that part. So it'll put the first part down. Then if Overdub is turned on and I hit record, it's going to keep the original part and I'm going to add another layer on top of it. So that's the way it's designed for Overdub. And to the right here we have a Countoff. So for instance, which also kind of ties into the metronome. So if I double click on the metronome, here's the metronome, and it's ready to go. I can just say at the beginning, as I start my project, I want to have a 2-bar count off. So if I turn on count off and go back to the beginning and I hit play, It's going to count off. 2, 3, 4. So I might want that count off to be audible. So let's make sure that it is. Always a click. And let's make sure that it's audition. Cool. And we're going to make it set to go. So we've got our count off bars. We've got our metronome that we can turn on and off. We also have a loop feature, and this is cool. Once you turn on loop, this is called memory cycle. And by the way, these little help tags are visible whenever you hover above any part of the program. It will show you, what that little diagram, that little icon represents. So in this case, we've got overdub, the count off, the click, and memory cycle is our loop points. So if we wanted to loop, let's say from bar 25 to bar 33, we're able to set up the loop there. So now if I play at a period 25, and this is the first song that you see here in the Performer Lite demo. So what I'm going to do is go into the mixing board. I'm just going to turn it down just a little bit. Cool. So we'll go back to the regular sequence window. We've got a loop point set up. Now another thing I wanted to show you, if you hold Control and you grab the wiper and you drag down, you're able to zoom into the main edit window. So Control drag, I might want to change this to something like 2 bars. So play. Cool. So easy to set up a loop point, no problem. This is also something you might find useful, which is auto record. So let's see in here. Here's auto record. So you can set it, if you wanted to be able to punch in, meaning have it record the program automatically so that you can sit at the keyboard or play your instrument and have it record, have it jump in and jump out, or punch in, punch out when you want it to. You can set these points with this red strip. So you might punch in at bar 57 and punch out at bar 58. So let's actually do that. I'm going to go period bar 55. And we've got auto record turned on. So that will let us record at what we specified in the auto record, and this little memory strip will let us set the in and out points automatically. So that's cool. We can set up a loop point or a memory cycle. We can also set up an area to do our auto punch. So we don't have to necessarily do it on the fly. And another shortcut that I wanted you guys to be aware of is that record is the 3 button on the keypad. So 1 is rewind at the beginning, 3 is punch in, punch out, or record. Cool. So we're going to turn that off. The last thing I want to mention in this little shortcut area is solo. So if you're listening to a whole bunch of tracks, but you want to isolate one track, okay, just to want to concentrate on it, if I turn on solo, then I can just play enable whatever track I want. So let's maybe listen to synth sequence here, and I'll play enable that one because it's now in solo. What's it sound like? Cool. And also when I go to the mixing board, you'll see that that track there, that yellow track, that is the one that's in solo. You can have multiple tracks in solo. That means that those 3 elements are now isolated from the rest of the track. So if we go back to bar 1, remember 1 is our shortcut. We're back at bar 1. I can hit the space bar for play. Let's listen to these 3 tracks. Okay, we can take it out of solo at the top. So it's easy to isolate different types of tracks with solo. So that's the way that works. And of course, mute is self-explanatory. You can just mute the track. And of course, you can put any track you want into record. So we've talked about the transport, the counter, meters, tempos, shortcuts to things like overdub, the count off, the click, looping, auto recording, the solo button. Let's talk about this right column here. We've got a left column and a right column. There's some cool stuff in here. You'll notice that we've got some project notes, and these are cool. We've done some nice descriptive layout here of what some of the windows do, and so it'd be good for you if the first time you get this program running to read through the notes that we provide. So right off the bat, I want to actually hide everything on the column here. Nothing's selected. So the first thing I'm going to select is called the content browser. And the content browser is useful to get to different files on your computer. So right off the bat, this is the project that we're looking at, and I can get into the audio files. These are the audio files that came with this project. So if I wanted to listen to something, I can click on different elements, and I'm able to drag things in. So for instance, whatever you see in the content browser can be brought in. So it's no problem to add different types of tracks. And so you can also get into your bounces, which when you make a mix inside Performer Lite, and we're going to talk about that, it'll store that in what's called the bounces folder. And then we can also set up shortcuts to various, like places is where you can set up your own shortcuts. So I've set up a shortcut to what's called ML loops. And these are various loops that I brought in. And now if you hit add place, anywhere on your computer, you may have a folder of different audio effects or loops or anything that you want to bring into Performer Lite as sound. You could set up as a shortcut right here in the content browser. And also you can get access to MOTU's instruments. So Performer Lite actually comes with some great instruments. So for instance, if you go to the MOTU column, and you can see I've got other manufacturers in here. And if you're able to install and run other instruments, virtual instruments, and audio plugins inside Performer Lite. So here are the MOTU plugins that come with the program. I can get into things like modulo, synthesizer, a sampler, synthesizers come with Performer Lite, and I can access those from the content browser. I can get into my effects. So let me click on this for a minute. And of course, we also give you things like distortion pedals, choruses, compressors, reverbs are also built into Performer Lite. So that's at the top. By the way, whatever is selected at the top, you'll notice in the upper right, that is going to give us more options for whatever's selected. So for instance, right now, that's everything we need to know is in this window. So we're going to switch over now to the Soundbites. So everything that you record in the project, every audio file that you record gets brought into the Soundbites window. So you're able to, if you wanted to convert it or export it, if you wanted to process it, change it somehow, in terms of sampling rate or the resolution of it, you're able to manage all of your files, and you can look at all the different sampling rate formats that you're using, when you created a file, and so on and so forth. So that's the access to the sound bites that are recorded. And then also we talked about this other window I want to talk about you saw when I first opened the project. These are called sets, which one project inside a Performer Lite, you can have multiple projects. So it's kind of cool, like if you were working on a song, let's say a 4-song EP, you could actually have each of the songs in your EP as separate sets. So this is cool, and we're going to actually switch here to a different set in a moment. So that's the sets. And of course, what's cool about sets is that each one is totally independent, and you're able to drag files from one set to another set. So it makes it easy to bring files in and out. If there's certain things you want to use, effects, drums, loops, it's easy to do that when you have multiple sets. And then, of course, we have project notes. So we've given you some descriptions on various settings in here, but you can also just start typing, and if you have things you want to remember about the session, certain microphones that you're using, anything that you want to type in, you can store in the notes. And again, you have access to the various settings for each of those windows. So we can hide the project notes. So that's the right sidebar. So again, we might look at the content browser. We might look at the soundbite, all the sound bites that belong to the project, the sets, and of course the notes. So we can just close the right sidebar. That way we have more space for editing. Let's go to the left sidebar. This is actually very straightforward. The first thing you're going to see is the track selector. So right now, we can have the view just be one track, and you're able to resize one track to make it very large. Or you can also, just using the track selector, you're able to just start clicking on these, or you can click and drag and show all the tracks in the track selector. So it's basically, think of it as a way to view whatever tracks you want at any given time. So you can always hide tracks or show tracks in there. So that's the track selector. Then we have something called the track inspector. So here's what this shows you. Whenever I click on a track, it brings it in focus. It'll show me over here. I can set my inputs and outputs. You can do it in the track here, but you can even get some more settings in the track inspector. So for instance, what's my input to this track? What's my output? When we talk about input and output, we're talking about using your MOTU audio interface. So in fact, let's pause just for one moment and talk about the overall settings of the hardware. So let's just close the track inspector. We're going to come back to that for a moment. So just to make sure that you're using the MOTU interface the right way and with the right settings, anytime you want to look at your MOTU hardware settings, it's easy to get to. If you go to Setup, and we go down to Configure Audio System, Configure Hardware Driver. this is going to show you, and I'm using the MOTU 1248, but the M series interface, the M2, the M4, or any other MOTU interface will show up in the hardware list. And once it's selected, you're able to choose what the sampling rate is. You can choose 44.1 or higher sampling rates. And then, of course, the thing I want you to be most aware of is this buffer size. So when you're recording audio into a computer, you have to deal with a little bit of latency depending on how much processing is happening in the computer. And so what's called round-trip latency. The audio comes into your interface, it gets processed in Digital Performer, and then it gets sent back. How long is that trip, and is there any latency or lag in the audio? If there's a little bit of lag, you can always bring this number down. As you bring the number down, you reduce the lag or latency, but it puts a little bit more strain on your computer. Generally, 256 or 128, if your computer is pretty fast, will be a nice way to have no latency, and your computer will still have enough resources left over to handle virtual instruments, audio tracks. So we're going to leave my buffer here at 256. When I hit OK, it's just going to make sure that your MOTU interface is working well with Performer Lite and there's no latency. So that's cool. That's all set to go. So now back real quick over to the track inspector is where we can set up our inputs, our outputs. We can have multiple takes. So every track that you record on for audio or MIDI, you can have multiple takes. So if you can get it, do one take, do another take, and so on and so forth. And you can keep those right inside each track. And then we're going to get into automation modes kind of a little bit down the road. That's kind of a day two kind of a topic. And then we can talk about enabling a track for automation. The rest of these are stuff that we're going to kind of get into because I want to stay focused on the getting started. So the next thing I want to talk about is just the channel strip. And this is just a nice thing that we have on the left here, which is whatever track you highlight, there'll be a channel strip that will show you that track. So you can easily just get over here and change the levels for whatever track is in focus. And then you can also switch over to master. So it's a quick way to go from the channel to the master. And remember, master is the global setting. All the audio gets sent to the master, and we can change it, make it louder or softer. Cool. Okay, so we're back looking at the Performer Lite layout. And on the left column, we were talking about the track selector. And by the way, all these windows you can resize. You'll see the divider where you can, if you want to use less or more space, you're able to do that with the left side. I want to talk about the tools for a minute. We basically give you a primary and secondary tool. When you click in the primary, there's lots of different types of tools, like the pencil tool, the mute tool, the zoom tool, the scissor tool. Lots of different types of tools are built in as the primary tool. Generally, you would want to leave it at the arrow key, which is the window you're going to use for being able to click and select things, for deleting or changing or extending. Everything that you do with audio and MIDI is all about the position of where you're clicking. So we want to probably leave this on arrow, but the secondary tool could be whatever you decide that you use the most, whether it's pencil, I-beam, muting, and so on and so forth. And we're going to get more into the tools as time goes on. So that's going to come. So I think we've kind of made a round trip. And again, sort of, since we're all going through this for the first time, we've talked about the transport, we've talked about the counter, setting the tempo, and then shortcuts, the various types of edit windows, getting into our project notes, our sound, our different sound bites. So let's do this. Let's actually go for a minute and talk about setting up a very, very basic project for the first time. And so let's do that together. I'm going to actually close this project, and I'm not going to save it. And now we're back to the welcome window. Let's just choose an empty project. And we're just going to put this on the desktop, and we're just going to call this PL1, Performer Lite 1. We're going to save it. So here's an empty project. There's nothing in here whatsoever. So we're going to actually show how do we add a virtual instrument, and how do we add an audio track, and how do we just do basic recording in this program. So let's do it. So first and foremost, we're going to go up to Project, and this is where we can add tracks. We have MIDI tracks, a mono audio track, stereo track. We're going to go to Instruments with Options. So this is going to bring up a little dialog that's going to say, well, what do we want? We want 1, and now we're going to change it from unassigned to MOTU. And so let's go into baseline, which is one of our included synths. And we're going to say we're going to provide a MIDI track for baseline. So once we choose the instrument, it's going to have one track ready to be assigned, and we're going to hit OK. So it's simple. It brings up this little synthesizer. This is a cool little like Moog sounding bass synthesizer that sounds great. And so you'll notice whenever you open up one of the included instruments, you'll notice under the upper left corner that it'll say none. We give you a lot of cool custom presets, and check them out. So for instance, let's say we go down to analog basses. And so as we start picking these, you'll notice that I've got a track in record and it's ready to go. So I just need to play it from the keyboard. It's cool. Okay. So let's just play a couple notes here and let's just see. Okay. So now if we have MIDI notes that we record into the window, if I double click on this clip, it brings up the clip editor. Okay. The clip editor will let me come in and change these notes. And so it's easy to move notes around. You can hear them as you edit them. So I could just say, hey, well, let me just change these notes a little bit. And if I didn't like the timing of the notes, I can always highlight the notes and we could go up to the region menu and I could do something like quantize them. And quantizing them will make them kind of more perfect and more on the grid. So I might just quantize these notes to something like 1/8 notes. Okay, so that's nice. And we can delete this note. And so now we also have our various tools. Remember we talked about up at the top here, I've got my primary tool. We also have a pencil tool. So P, the letter P will let me add the note through the pencil tool in the actual clip editor. So now we've got da da da, and so we can change the duration of the notes. You know, we can do all of our editing right within the clip editor. And so now this is a MIDI track. So now you'll also notice that, let me just do a little bit of editing work here. Let me just move the wiper. So you'll notice that not only can I edge edit in the lower half of the window, if I go a little bit higher, I can also loop the clip. So it's very easy to edit the notes, whether I double click on them and change the notes here, or use the pencil tool, or change the duration of the notes. I can change the volume of the notes. So I've got all that those different editing options. And of course, at the top here, I can also loop the clip. So that's easy to do. So no problem. I just keep continuing recording my MIDI part. I can go into the mixing environment. We can change the level of the bass. We can pan it left or right. Let's see what that sounds like. Take it to the beginning, bar 1. So we can pan the bass part left or right. And so that's basic MIDI recording. And so we've got a whole bunch of virtual instruments in here that we can use. And remember, we're in bassline. So if we double click on the name bassline in our tracks list, it'll show us the instrument. So now maybe we'll change the sound to something else. Like let's try a lead sound. What does this sound like? So it's got more bite to it. And of course we can just down arrow through different patches and try out some different things. So lots of different patches in there. So cool, that's basic MIDI recording. First thing we did was we went to project and we went to instruments with options and we added this bass line. So what about doing an audio recording for your voice or your guitar? Let's talk about that. So what we're going to do now is go up to project and we're going to add a mono audio track. Usually when you're recording a single voice or an instrument, you want a mono track. But every once in a while you might do something in stereo where you've got something coming in from a keyboard, or let's say you're putting 2 microphones on a piano or something and you want to record it in stereo. But generally for your voice or a guitar part or a bass part, usually that's an audio track, is a mono audio track. So here it is at the bottom. And I'm going to option click to name it, and we're just going to call this voice. And so now you'll notice that I've got the input column that's not selected. So here's the soundbite, here's the input column. If I click on the input column, you'll notice you've got access to your M2 or M4 inputs. So I've got a few more inputs on my interface, but I'm going to choose the input. So now you'll notice if I put this in record, check, you can see there's my level. As I talk, I can check the level coming in. If I wanted to add an effect, so let's do that. Let's go to the mixing board, or I can do it right here in the channel strip. What if we added a reverb to my voice? So what I'm going to do is click on the column. It's going to bring up all these different effects that come with the program. Let's go into, let's see here. Actually, let's do it like, let's go into category manufacturer MOTU. And let's look for, here's a reverb down here called Proverb. So let's do that. We're going to add Proverb. I double click on it. Check. Now you can see it's a big, big reverb sound. And the mix is a little too wet. So you can change the mix level to make it, you know, dry or wetter. And of course you have lots of different types of effects. So down below you'll see a down arrow where you can get into lots of different impulse responses that we have, or presets for our effects. So for instance, if we went down to something like a concert hall, let's see what that sounds like. Check. Yeah, it's a nice sound. So now if I wanted to start recording, I'm ready to go. I can just take the bass out of record. I've got one track in record, so I hit record. Wow, my bass is nice and loud there. We'll get rid of that for a second. Hit record. Testing 1 2. Testing. Yeah. Check check 1 2. There it is. It's laying down the voice. So I've got it. I can take it out of record. And now let's do a little bit of basic editing with the audio that I just recorded. So you can easily just edge edit that. Easy to change where it starts and stops. Now you'll notice if it might be snapping to the grid, which is at the top here. If you follow where I am, you can turn on and off the grid. So if you're working with music that you want to a click track, let's say you want to record something so it's on a grid, to a certain tempo. Let's say you pick the tempo and you've got a click track. You record the audio, you can edit that audio on the grid. You can also just turn off the grid, and that way you can just edit it freely. So if we turn off the grid, now I can freely edit my audio tracks. Now watch what happens when I go to the top corner here. I can do a fade. No problem there. I can also even time stretch it to slow it down a little bit. So let's hear what I sound like with time stretch a little bit. We'll play it back, go back to bar 1. Testing 1 2. So it kind of sounds nice and slow. Well, we can always undo that. And you can always option drag and loop your audio as you go. So we've got basic MIDI recording, audio recording. And so now if I wanted to put a different effect on my voice, we could go into the mixing board. And then we've got, of course, here's the reverb that we had on there. But maybe we want to actually add an EQ. So let's change the sound of my voice a little bit. Maybe it's a little too bright or not bright enough. So what we could do is we can move this proverb down one slot. These are called inserts. And this time, let's actually click in the browser and let's search for an EQ. So we've got a really good one in here called the Masterworks EQ, MW EQ. If I click on it, and this is where we've got different parametric bands where we can add highs and lows. So maybe we can listen to the voice a little brighter. Let's see what that sounds like. Or testing 1 2. Testing. Yeah. Check. It's a little brighter. It's a little more articulate sounding. So we've got a whole bunch of different effects, and maybe we could even add. How about we add one more, which is a compressor. So we could go in here to. I'm going to right click this time. I can single click, which will bring up this browser, or I can also right click if you have a right click mouse, and I might add now the MW compressor. So this is where we give you, and again, lots of good presets. So maybe we'll use something like reduce sibilance as a preset. And let's see what it sounds like. Now we've got an equalizer, we've got a compressor, and a reverb all in one channel. Or testing 1 2. Testing. Yeah. Check. Yeah, that sounds pretty good. So if I wanted to actually keep that as a preset, all three of those in that particular configuration, I can go to the very top and I can just save this insert setting. So now I might just call this, it's fine, MW equalizer, compressor, proverb. I hit save, and then I'm able to call up whatever presets that I have for any of the mixer channels. But we give you nice starting points for different types of instruments. So if you're a guitar player, bass player, vocalist, and you're looking for a starting point, you might change it, but you need somewhere to start. And you go, oh, I'm going to lay down a bass part. These are some good starting points. And you'll see that we've EQ'd it in such a way that it'll be nice for that type of instrument. But we also have, like he mentioned, some nice guitar ones to get started. Let's just look at lo-fi. Cool. So in lo-fi, it looks like we've got some really kind of a telephonic sort of phone effect on the voice with look like some kind of a noise gate. So that's cool. We've got some presets in there that you can use for different types of instruments. And by the way, you can always mute or bypass any of these channels. And you can also do it across the entire insert. If you just option click, you can mute everything that's in the channel. So no problem muting that there. Cool. So editing MIDI, editing audio, we talked about, let's talk a little bit more about the mixing board. We talked about soloing and muting channels, putting tracks in record. So if we've got our vocal in here now, we'll go back over to the regular sequence editor. And we're talking about our having our channel strip, our track selector. We've been talking about the tools. Maybe at this point it'd be nice to add another instrument. Or how about we change this bass line to a different instrument? So remember how, we can double click on the name bass line, which is here, double click, and it brings up the instrument. I think I'll switch it. So let's actually go over to, let's look under manufacturer for MOTU. Maybe something like the Proton, which is an FM synth that comes with Performer Lite. So we've got lots of cool presets, and there's one I think I like in here I've used before. Let's see if it's in the list. Pads. Yeah, this is one called Tears, which is a cool sounding effect. I'll play it for you. So we've got a MIDI track. We've got this Proton, and so I'm going to put the MIDI track in record. And so let's hear what this patch sounds like. Just has a cool kind of vibe to it. Now, if we thought maybe it was a little too bright, let's say as an example, I could go into the mixing board. And here's Proton. There's the instrument track. You'll always see it in the mixing board. If you need to get to it to change the sound, you're always able to just double click on the very top one that says Proton. But I can also put effects after. So I might just right click here and put an EQ on here. And let's say we want to take a little bit of the top end off of this to make it more mellow sounding. So what I'm going to do is enable this top filter, and we're just going to roll off some of the top end. Let's see what it sounds like. Make it a little bit darker. So it's easy to add EQs, equalizers, or effects, or if we wanted to put, let's say we wanted to put a delay on that. Let's do it. So we're going to go in here to the delay. I used it recently. And so, for instance, if we wanted to add some kind of a cool echo on this sound, let's do it. Let's see what it sounds like. So yeah, you've got all sorts of great effects that are built in here, whether EQs or delays and echoes and things. And like Jim mentioned, you can easily save your own presets, or we give you lots of cool starting points as well. So that's basically a super easy way to start recording in the program, is to start going up to project and adding different types of tracks. An instrument with options was the way to add a virtual instrument track. And then if you have an external MIDI, let's say, because you have MIDI ports on your M2 and M4, if you have a keyboard in your studio, you can connect it and you can just add an external MIDI track by adding the MIDI. And then, of course, here's the MIDI track, and you would want to set up on your computer, whether Mac or PC, if you have an external MIDI keyboard. And that way you can trigger it from within Performer Lite. So yeah, you've got virtual instruments, you could do external MIDI, and of course we talked about having mono audio tracks or stereo audio tracks, and then having access to the mixing environment. So let's go back to the main window here, and let's just add a stereo audio track together. Here's stereo. And you can see it's at the bottom. I'm going to move it towards the top. If I grab it, I can move it to the top. Here it is. And I'm just going to make it a little bit larger, and we're going to rename it. I'm just going to call this loop. Okay, and here it is. So there's nothing on this track. So I'm going to actually show how easy it is to load it in a couple different ways. First, I want to do on the far right, we talked about having our right column be things like the content browser. So if I go to the content browser, I've got my shortcut here called ML Loops. So it's easy for me to take a stereo loop and just drag it in. So it's really easy to bring in audio loops, and that's great. Okay, now what I could do is if I move this to the beginning, and if you can see there's a menu right here where I can turn on the stretch feature. What's great about Performer Lite is it has the ability to detect the tempo and the length of audio files that I bring in. So when I went to the menu and turned on stretch, it's now conformed to the tempo. Let's see what that sounds like. Do I have any other tracks in here? No. Cool. So that's a loop. And remember we talked about at the upper right here, you can actually set it up to where we can do the edge editing. We can edit the loop. So, and now it's easy to drag in other loops. So it's very easy to go to the content browser, and then with the stuff that we provide, you can drag that in, or any other loops that you have. And if the stretch feature is turned on, it will conform to the tempo. We can also drag these loops into our clips environment. So let's do that. I'm going to delete it from the tracks window. Let's go up to the top to the circle, which is the clips window. And so here's my loop track. There's nothing in here. So let's just grab some stuff, and I'm going to grab drums, and we'll put it on the first cell. So let's bring it in. Here it comes. And so now for me to edit it, it's going to take a breath because it's going to analyze the audio for the tempo, and it's going to analyze the length. So double click. There it is. So I just need to update the loop here real quick. Good to go. And so now let's do another one. Let's see, we've got drums 1. Let's go down to drums 4. Let's put that on this one. And we're going to add a hi-hat. So let's do that. Let's see here. I'm still loading that in. Oh, you know what I think part of it is, Jim, that these are different sampling rate. That's all. So it's doing a little extra work converting it to the sample rate. That's all. So if your loops are at one sampling rate and your project at a different rate, it's set up automatically to convert it for you. So don't have to think about it. It just took an extra breath for it to do it during our project. So if I double click on it, again, I'm just going to update this. So now we've got 2 different loops. So in the clips window, I can just hit play. It's going to play it. And I'm going to set the loop grid to 2 bars. Play the other one. So we can easily stop it. So that's cool that you can drag audio loops into the main window, or you can drag them into the clips window, and they will conform to the tempo if stretch is turned on, and they'll sample rate convert if they're a different format or different rate. So it's cool that we provide you with loop content and of course instruments as well. So let's talk about the included instrument that comes with Performer Lite. So we'll go back to the main window, and we've got our little project that's pretty empty, but we're going to add, this time we're going to talk about UVI Workstation, which is included with Performer Lite. So let's do that. Let's add a whole new instrument with options, and we're going to go to unassigned. We're going to go to MOTU, we're going to go to UVI Workstation. So I'm going to choose Workstation. And when it says 34 out, that's the VST version. And so we confirm that when you install Performer Lite for the first time on the Mac or Windows, it's going to install the Workstation VST version. That way, if you ever need to work with somebody on the Windows side, you'll have the same samples, the same sound libraries. So no problem. In fact, Performer Lite supports audio unit plugins and VST plugins. So as you start thinking about adding to your studio, if you're going to buy other third-party instruments or virtual effects and that kind of thing, you can shop for VSTs or audio unit plugins, and Performer Lite supports both. So we're going to add, here's our workstation. So the first time this comes up, you're able to go right into your parts. But one thing I like to show right off the bat is it's a good practice to switch over to the multi-view. The multi-view will let us run more than one sound inside Workstation at the same time. So let's do that. Let's switch to multi, and it shows you we've got 1 channel, 2, 3, 4 channels, and we can just keep adding up to 16 channels can exist in one instance of Workstation. So it's cool. You can have lots of different sounds, layers, different keyboards, different effects. So now what we have to do is simply go to channel 1 where it says empty, and we double click, and it brings up our browser. And so you'll notice as I've got lots of different sound banks installed on my computer, but the one that comes with Performer Lite is actually here. It's called MOTU Instruments Lite. And this is where we give you a really nice assortment of 1.5 gigabytes of sounds. And lots of different categories like loops. Let's make sure that we're not too loud here. Where are we? So what channel? I'm on. Here's Workstation, and here's the MIDI track. So I'm just going to pull down the fader a little bit. So we've got some brushed drum loops. Now you'll notice as I start clicking on these, they're just going to start auditioning, which is cool. So I'm going to go back to channel 1, try a few things. Those are actually really nice. So those are, you're going to hear acoustic bass samples, you're going to see synthesizers, and the loops are great because they're going to basically work with whatever tempo you're working with, which comes in really handy. So as you change your tempo for a given project and you start using some of our provided content, it will match the tempo. So we've got some cool loops that you can see that are not just like electronic drums and stuff, but really nice, brushed acoustic drums and things. A really nice assortment of acoustic pianos, which comes in here. So we've got channel 1. So see MIDI channel 1. So if I wanted to add more MIDI channels, each MIDI channel can be assigned to these different sounds that we load. So we're going to actually do that together. I'll add multiple sounds. In fact, it's neat the way that the browser's set up. If I go to the bass category and I find, let's say, a nice acoustic bass or an electric bass, a fretless bass sound, I can just drag right up to the channel. So now you're thinking, okay, channel 1 is piano, channel 2 is bass. What am I going to put on channel 3? How about a string part on channel 3? So I want definitely like a big full string sound, so that's going to go on channel 3. And so what are these sounds, how do they sound? So let's see, channel 1 is piano. So you can see you've got a nice, very, very rich, warm sounding piano that comes with it. And let's say we want to put a little bit more of a reverb on that piano. Let's just pause for a moment and make this sound a little bit better. So we've got this piano and we've got a reverb on here. So maybe we need to make it a little wetter. So you'll see that I'm not seeing all the parameters for this particular reverb. So if I click on the right here, I'm going to get to wet. So let's crank up the verb a little bit. Oh yeah, way better. Okay, so cool, yeah. Okay, so we've got a reverb on this channel. Well, what's the effect on the fretless bass? Well, it looks like the fretless bass has some kind of an EQ, an exciter, a chorus. It's got lots of different effects. And so you're able to come in here if you wanted to delete effects or bypass them. You can just click on the X if you wanted to take off different types of effects. And you'll notice that we have the preset effects, but you can also have effects that are unique to each part. So presets, or you could say part 2 is going to have a reverb. Or you might even use master. So in the case where you wanted to run, let's say, orchestral instruments, you had flutes and oboes and woodwinds, and you might want to have one reverb, you could click on down the effects section under master, and that way you can just plus in some kind of a reverb, let's say like a nice impulse response cathedral or concert hall. And now everything coming out of Workstation comes through this master effect. So cool, great sounding pianos, fretless basses. What does the fretless bass sound like? Let's actually do that. So I'm going to add another MIDI track here. Well, let's do that. Let's go, and we're going to assign this MIDI track to Workstation channel 2. Some nice fretless stuff. What does the string sound like? Let's just assign this over here to 3. And I think let's just make sure that it's not too loud. Turn down the string a little bit. So yeah, that string gets pretty hot for some reason. I'll just turn it down even a little bit more. So nice assortment of different things. And again, we can put different types of effects on there. We can put different types of EQs. So dig into this, like really spend some time going through the sample library. It's the MOTU Instruments Lite, and that comes with, and it's already installed for Performer Lite, where it will be pianos and basses and acoustic guitars, electric guitars, strings, and then you'll see we've got some French horns and saxophones and things like that that are built in, woodwinds, percussion. So it's a good assortment of sounds that are also very efficient. So you can run quite a few of these. In fact, we talked at the very beginning when it opens up to the actual welcome window, one of the choices was to use, in fact, we could actually open that for a minute. Let's do that. So I'm going to close this project, and we're not going to save it because I want you guys to come back to the welcome window. Because what if we check out the orchestral ensemble? What does that sound like? So I'm going to click on it, and now it's going to say, hey, where do you want to put this and what do you want to call it? And we're just going to call this Orc 1. I'm just going to put it on the desktop, hit return. So now we're going to take just a second to load the samples, and did it pretty fast. That's one great thing about this is, so let's go into the mixing board for a minute once it finishes loading. And so you can see this is a pretty elaborate setup for all the orchestral sounds, but we've got all these different types of instruments, flutes and oboes and clarinets and bassoons. And then we've got, looks like whoever created this great preset has lots of different effects and reverbs and echoes and delays and stuff on here. So all we have to do at this point is just go back to the main window, and you see how we've got the flute in record. But I can just arrow down using the arrow keys on my computer, my computer keyboard. I can just up and down go between the various types of instruments. So flute, what does that sound like? Let's go to oboe. This is is cool, so that you're able to, now you're thinking, okay, I want to write something orchestral today. Okay, so what's the tempo? It's going to be 68 beats per minute. It's going to be in 4/4 time. And so now I'm just going to start recording. I'm just going to start laying down parts. Now, here's the coolest thing about this program and how easy it is. If I lay down a flute part, let's just say something simple like, it's the simplest little cue ever. Whatever state this program is in terms of however many parts you have, however long it is, at any point you can simply just select all and you're able to make a mix. So since I've got a little reverb on there, I'm going to select a little bit longer so that it covers the echo. So watch how quickly I can make a mix. And we've only added one part, but we could have, many, many different instruments and many different parts. But I've just added a very simple little flute part. So we're going to go up to File, and we're going to just simply bounce to disk. And so what are we going to call this masterpiece here? We're just going to call this Flute 2 bars. Okay, that's it. I'm ready to go. So let's just hit OK. And it's so small that it's done. There it is. I've just rendered this file as audio. So now it looks like I've rendered it as a mono track. Let me just do it one more time. This time we're going to do it as a stereo track. So we're going to bounce to disk, and I'm going to choose stereo, and that's fine. We can add it to the sequence. We're going to call it Flute 2 bars. So I'm going to hit OK. So now it's going to very, very quickly make a stereo mix of the flute part. So as you're working on your piece, and you've added some guitar parts, you've added some virtual instruments, and you need to make a mix. You're going to send your friend an MP3. You're going to finally post this mix up on a music streaming service, Spotify or something, and you've made your mix. So now you'll notice that when I hide the project and I go over here to my Orc project, look in the bounces folder. So it's also in the bounces folder. That's where my mixes go when I bounce them down. So now I can just simply upload that to Spotify or whatever, put it on my phone and check it out in the car. So it's very easy as you start working in this program to start recording your MIDI parts, your audio parts, and be able to make mixes as you go. And so everything gets applied. All the effects, the levels, the panning. We've made it very simplified for you to be able to quickly write and work on music and then make your mixes as you go. And of course, everything you want to save your projects. And then at some point down the road, if you decided to get into more film scoring, you wanted to upgrade to our flagship program, Digital Performer, everything will open up in Digital Performer. So it's nice that all this work that you put into this, but again, Performer Lite is sonically and it's in the way that it's set up is a really, really good program. What are the things that sort of belong together as a project? So I'm going to hide Performer Lite, and on the desktop, I've created a folder here, and this is my Orc 1 project. And this is where I showed you the bounce that I made in here of that 2-bar flute part. But you'll notice, so this is the parent folder, Orc 1 project. Whenever you have a project folder, that contains all the elements of the Performer Lite project. And so in there, if I've recorded audio, it analyzes the audio for me. So it knows the sampling rate, the waveform, it gets stored in this. It's not something you necessarily need to worry about, just that this is part of the project. The analysis files, if I'm using any audio caching, if I do record audio, it will be in the audio files folder. So you want to make sure that when you create a project, you start doing vocal parts, guitar parts, those will get stored in the project folder in the audio files folder. And I talked about my bounce. There's the actual project file. See, it's got the icon here, DP doc. So again, what's nice is that Performer Lite and Digital Performer can both open up each other's projects, which is by design, so that you can go back and forth. If you have a friend that's working in a different version of the program, or Performer Lite or Digital Performer. And then we have unlimited undo history. So everything that you do in the program in terms of editing, or you want to go back to a different state of the project, earlier version of it, is stored in the undo history. So you want to keep these files sort of together and organized. That way you won't lose anything, or you shouldn't have any problem or lose any files, is to keep everything. And DP does this, and Performer Lite does this for you automatically. When you open up a project, everything that happens, all the audio, it gets organized for you, so you're not going to have to worry about it. It's just that if you're moving files around, you want to move the entire project. You don't want to just pull something out of it. You want to keep these elements together. And that way, again, you won't have any errors or anything like that. And so you're always, if you're going to move a file between different computers, or you're going to send me, it's a good idea to just, compress the file. And that way it just creates a zip. And now you can now like put that on Dropbox or, Google Drive. And so again, keep your files organized and as separate projects. So let's say I've got a full orchestral piece that's all mostly MIDI at this point, but I do want to send it to somebody who's working in a different DAW. And they're going to add some parts and then give it back to me. Sometimes it's enough to just send a mix and just say, hey, I'm at 68 beats per minute, and I'm just going to send you a mix. You can add the French horn parts, but they might say, well, no, give me all of your MIDI tracks, give me your audio tracks, I want everything. Okay, no problem. So now if I highlight the MIDI parts, and let's say I select across the entire project, let's say it's, whatever, 30, 40 bars, I select it. I can always go to File, and I can save as, and I can save it as a standard MIDI file. So now it's not going to be, this Orc1 is not going to be a digital Performer Lite project or a digital Performer project. It's going to be a standard MIDI file. And so you'll be able to create this as a tempo meter map or have all the separate MIDI tracks together as a standard MIDI file. So that's something that, and I hit OK. If I hide Performer Lite, there's my MIDI file. That's what someone could import into another DAW. And that way they have not only the tempo, but they get all the actual MIDI tracks. Because remember, and it'll be labeled by their name. So it'll be flute, oboe, clarinet, and all the MIDI parts will show up. So now the interesting thing is, if they don't have UVI Workstation, which they won't have the exact same sound bank, but inevitably they're going to probably want to just reassign those MIDI parts to whatever samples they have. And so in order to do the audio, you can set it up in such a way that you can bounce. So if I've got my MIDI tracks, I'm going to send the MIDI file, but I also want to send them digital audio. So that way they can use the parts. So I can just highlight these parts and go up to File. We talked about bouncing them to disk. Now what's cool is that if I have it set up where I have multiple outputs from Workstation, I can set this up to where I can bounce them all at one time, but I have to use a lot of outputs. I have to have a separate output for every MIDI track from Workstation. And the way that works is, if I go, let's see, down here, I'll go to Workstation here in the mixing board. And where's Workstation? Here it is. Oh, it looks like there's lots of instances of Workstation in here. But you'll notice that when you go to a MIDI part, you're able to set the output settings. Here it is. So, and again, this is fairly technical for day one, but you can set each of these MIDI parts inside of Workstation to go out of the main out or to go out of a separate out. And if those separate outs are going into auxiliary tracks, you're able to make stems in one shot. But you know what? And to be honest with you, it's very simple and very fast. And this is what I recommend is you can very quickly just highlight the flute part. So let me just option drag this down. So I've got a flute, oboe, and clarinet part. And I need to make the flute stem. So I'm just going to go up here and I'm going to say flute stem. And then watch how quickly it'll make my flute stem. And then I'll go to the next stem. So there it is. I go to the oboe stem. I go to Control J. That's the bounce window. I'm already in the field to name it. I'm just going to say oboe stem. So, literally you could do this in a matter of a couple minutes, is just work your way down the track and just go clarinet stem. So it's very fast. So by the time you set up all the outputs, clarinet stem, and by the time you set it up, you could have made your stems just in a matter of a minute. So that's it. So now I've saved my standard MIDI file. So now here's what I could do. I could take these audio files, I can highlight them, I can right click on them, and I can export them. Export the selected sound bites, and I'll put them on the desktop, and I'll create a folder, and I'll call this Orc1 stems. And I create, and I can choose the different types of files. So I'm going to choose broadcast wave interleaved. That way the left and right parts of the stereo are together combined in one file. So broadcast wave interleave, I hit open, and I save them. They're done. So we can hide Performer Lite. Let's see, where are my stems? Here they are. So I might put my standard MIDI file in there. So now he's got the audio, and I'll just click it and send it over to him. And so he's got the MIDI, he's got the audio. So it's cool, it's easy to be able to make those bounces go very quickly. And so that's a way to create stems, or MIDI files and stems. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for being here, everybody. And let us know if you have any questions. If you have any suggestions for us, we have an email account, which is suggestions@motu.com. And again, let us know, how it's going with Performer Lite. And thank you for being here.